everyone, welcome to Cong TV, a channel specializing in Vietnamese history. My channel will provide information about Vietnam world from a different view. So please like the video, subscribe my channel to support me. You probably heard a lot about the Vietnamese Army's guerrilla fighting style. From French soldiers to American soldiers, the Vietnamese Army brought many surprises, leaving most of the soldiers alive after leaving the battlefield of Vietnam to hunt everything until old age and unable to get rid of it. Typically in guerrilla battles, the Vietnamese army set up barrier traps made of various materials to keep the French upset every time they moved. Specifically, during the ambush of La Nga in February 1948, the Vietnamese army knew through the intelligence that many French officers would travel to Đà Lạt in early March 1948 to discover plans to sweep in the south. As a result, the Southern Command of Vietnam devised the plan to ambush the convoy carrying French officers from the start in order to foil the French enemy's plot. That's the concept. But the question is, where to ambush on the 400-kilometer journey from Saigon to Đà Lạt? The French army would almost certainly take Route 20 to Đà Lạt because the Vietnamese army had firmly grasped the information. As a result, the Vietnamese army chose a 7-kilometer long ambush point from La Nga Bridge to Định Quán. The location was chosen because the road winds through the forest and the surrounding terrain is 1 to 2 meters higher than the road surface, with some places exceeding 6 meters. This is a critical factor for the Vietnamese army when selecting an ambush point, because the principle of ambush is to choose a location for the ambush that ensures the troops are hidden secretly. The location had been determined, but the next issue is time. When is the best time for Vietnamese troops to ambush? On that day in 1948, the Vietnamese army's firepower was still limited, and the French dominated the airspace. So, if the ambush fails and is counterattacked, the Vietnamese army would suffer significant losses. For this reason, the Vietnamese army decided to ambush at 3 p.m. when there were many clouds, making it difficult for the French Air Force to fight. In addition, while the two sides were fighting a few kilometers away, the Vietnamese army burned rice straw, causing smoke to fly so that the rescue aircraft could drop bombs on the burning area. It was impossible to see the situation below because they were flying overhead in cloudy conditions. Knowing where there is a lot of smoke is hard to fight, so the Vietnamese army could conduct a very good diversion. The time and place had been determined, but how would the French alert into the correct location and time that the Vietnamese army had determined? That was the most difficult experience the French army had, because the car carried all the generals and colonels. The French army would not travel at night to avoid the Vietnamese army's guerrillas. According to calculation, the French convoy traveled 100 kilometers from Saigon to La Nga under normal conditions, implying that the French would arrive at the Vietnamese army ambush site sooner. As a result, the Vietnamese army must do everything possible to extend the time to match the time provided by the Vietnamese army. The problem is that the Vietnamese army can use a variety of weapons, including bombs, mines, and guns, but only at a low enough level to cause the convoy to stop but not to turn around. All the preparations would be cancelled if the convoy turned around. The Vietnamese army would deploy the position after all calculations had been completed and the French convoy had left. The French convoy began its journey on the morning of the 1st March 1948. The task of extending the starting time was assigned to a branch of the Vietnamese army. When the French convoy arrived in Hồ Nai, a tree fell on the road, forcing the leading team to go down to clean it up. During the cleanup, however, a bomb exploded, causing minor injuries to a few French soldiers. However, the French soldiers assumed that the bomb had been there for a long time and it was not a new bomb. That's why the French convoy proceeded. Because of the aforementioned situation, the French officials were on high alert, so the French army walked very carefully the rest of the way. From Hồ Nai to Dầu Giây, the French army went soldiers down to detect mines whenever there were a fallen tree or new dig hole. After scanning, nothing was discovered, so the convoy continued on its way. Everything went according to the Vietnamese army's plan because they had to stop so much. The first French vehicle arrived at the embassy at 3 p.m. This vehicle went inside without realizing that the Vietnamese army was waiting for it, and there were numerous bombs and mines on the ground. The French burning tanks patrolled the road from La Ngap Bridge to Địa Quán throughout the day. It was difficult to plant mines in such a way that the French army would not notice. The plan will be thwarted if the French army discovered that the Vietnamese army intend to ambush, take advantage of the road with a lot of elephants passing by and a lot of elephants down on that day. When an elephant pooped, the Vietnamese soldier hit mines in it right away. The French patrol car could not be seen as it passed by. The Vietnamese soldiers waited for the French vehicle to enter the Vietnamese army's ambush in order to block the vehicle's front and rear. When a group of Vietnamese soldiers opened fire on the convoy's leader, the French convoy was cornered. Then they continued to hit the middle of the convoy and locked the tail, preventing the French from reacting. The 59th convoy was completely destroyed. After nearly an hour of fighting, 150 French soldiers were killed, and 270 French soldiers were taken prisoner. There are also numerous stories about the Vietnamese guerrilla army. In northern Vietnam, French soldiers were concerned about the Vietnamese army's mine-sweeping methods, especially Route 5 from Hanoi to Hải Phòng. This was the main road along which the French battled with La motorized convoys. The mine-sweeping company of Kinh Thành District, Hải Dương Province, was the most well-known on that day. Mine jobs in this area were distinguished by meticulous mine-laying techniques. After burying the mines, the Vietnamese soldiers recovered the old soil and likely rolled a car wheel. The French soldiers' drivers assumed that a car has passed safely and continued to follow. And of course, the mine would explode as the car ascended. Mines were frequently buried in the middle of the road or close to the side of the road, confusing the French soldiers. To deal with this, the French had to employ cutting-edge mine detectors. The French believed that having mine detectors would make the move safer, because mine detectors were commonly used on European battlefields. The European battlefield also had far more modern, weapons than the Vietnam War. Although the Vietnamese army's weapons were primitive, their improvisation was exceptional. At that time, French soldiers used mine detectors to travel 20 kilometers, and they were overjoyed whenever they discovered a mine. But it wasn't until they jumped into a lagoon and they realized it was all a ruse. After 20 kilometers of searching, nothing was discovered, and the French soldier was forced to leave because they all saw all the fake mines. However, from kilometer 21 onwards, Vietnamese guerrilla planted real mines. Following the completion of the search, the French soldiers informed the commander that they had thoroughly investigated, checking that nothing was missing. However, the French convoy passing by the next day was still hit by mines, causing confusion within the French army. Soldiers stationed in isolated posts along major traffic routes in the French army had very boring lives because it was surrounded by hills and there were no people in this area. Every half month, food was delivered. The food supply truck was hit by bombs and mines one day and had to wait for the plane to resupply. Therefore, sometimes French soldiers were very hungry. Despite hunger and boredom, the French soldiers' lives at the post were extremely precarious. Every night, Vietnamese soldiers arrived to destroy them, preventing them from sleeping, throwing explosive grenades. On occasion, grenades exploded in the east, and there were several loud gunshots in the west before the guerrilla troops went home to sleep. The guerrillas slept well, but the French soldiers were wary, not knowing whether the mines were set up for fun or as a part of a real raid. Less or more force. Every few battles, the Vietnamese guerrilla troops fire a phony battle, followed by a real battle, a big fight, making the guards here always be on the lookout for potential combat situations. Every night, when they heard the sound of guns and bombs, the French soldier would wake up to prepare to fight. The night's sleep was poor. During the day, they had to patrol to fight a Vietnamese guerrilla team. However, no matter where they went, they saw evacuated houses and abandoned gardens. If they had met anyone, it would have been only old people. That's why the French soldier was so hesitant. The French soldier was transferred to a city after living there for 6 months to a year. Everyone was happy because they had been living there for about 6 months, and everyone's faces were emaciated from lack of sleep, thin and hungry from having to eat canned food and no fresh food because of dengue fever. Many people resembled zombies. The Vietnamese guerrilla army terrified the French soldiers, and many people were hunted to the point of fear every night. The stories above are from the French Resistance War. The Vietnamese guerrilla army fared much better in the American Resistance War. The story above of an American soldier after returning from the Vietnamese battlefield is even more haunting. After 20 years returning from the Vietnam War, an American veteran did not dare to touch the ground since the fear of siege mines. He described Viet Cong's mines as a horror. I was trained as a mine sweeper. Every time the patrol team left the base, we, the mine sweeper, had to take the lead. If you ask me how was my year in Vietnam, everything was shit. The Viet Cong came up with an extremely miserable game. They defecated or applied seed on my burial sites and then covered them with soil. Every morning, I would hear the sound of mine detectors reporting that they had metal around. Then the whole group stopped. I had to dig around the area, having suspected mice by hand. Digging a little deeper, my hand would touch a pile of human shit. Hooking all that shit up, digging further down, I could touch a can or piece of metal. They were very sharp, so if you have your hand cut, you would have to get a tender shot right away because of the dung heap. Every single time, after hooking up those shit, I waved my hand as a safe signal. The pursuit team moved on and stayed away from me because of the smell of shit on my hands. If you ask me why I don't wash my hands, a friend of mine did that. After he finished hooking up the shit, he saw a small pond nearby and went to wash his hands. Then the Viet Cong hid grenades on the bank of the pond. After that, no one wanted to find a place to wash their hands after detecting mice because there would be 2 more shitholes ahead. There were usually 3 shitholes on our way. I guess that the Viet Cong knew our base had 3 mice sweepers, and when the night came, they brought their shit out to make fun of us. In the next morning, I can imagine the happy face of those bastards when they pooped and thought we would have to dig those shit out. You ask why I had to dig those shit? Because while I was there were 2 real mice exploding that cost the life of 3 men of my pursuit team, and we cleared a dozen real mice. We set ambushes many times, but we couldn't catch them. After being beaten by mosquitoes all night, in the next morning there were no less mice and shit on the road, but that meant we were beaten to death by mosquitoes to keep the others safe, because the next morning's pursuit would be a different team. Obviously, the Viet Cong had followed very carefully. Until returning home, I still couldn't see a single guy or get a gun battle with him. And now you ask me how was my service time in Vietnam? It all shit. 20 years after returning from Vietnam, I just replanted vegetables in my garden. Before it, when I touched the ground, I smelled all the shit that I used to smell in Vietnam.
Oh no! Oh no!
Some stories above have shown us how terrifying the adaptability and guerrilla fighting ability of the Vietnamese army are. It's also the end of this video. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe our channel. This will be a motivation for us to bring more videos. Goodbye and see you again.